I have long wanted to initiate a series that would see us delve into the grim realities, mysteries and dark contrasts of human existence within the towering hive cities of M41. While we have of course considered in a more general or adjacent sense hive cities and some specific aspects of their inhabitants before, this was often parallel to a primary theme. Opening this series is long overdue, not least for the many of you who have been asking me to explore the intricate stratified layers of the world of Necromunda and its key hive city, Primus. In many respects, the city is little different than many thousands of other hive cities spread all through the galaxy of the Imperium, its squalid underhive consisting of many layers, all of which are saturated with desperate peon workers scratching out a raw existence of harsh survival. Such environments inevitably provide fertile grounds to raise up ruthless gangs who will control the lower levels through most often brutal violence. At the opposite end of the spectrum are those who dwell within its opulent spires, a realm to which few are permitted and where only the elite exist as they bask in what is for most humans within M41 unimaginable luxury. As we have explored before, any hive city is truly vast, its diameter often covering many hundreds of miles, its internal design consisting of an extremely dense urban structure, built over and over itself, expanded through millennia. Each hive city able to house many billions of humans. The vast majority of those citizens will live and die within its exterior walls, many never even seeing the light of day, for these cities are entirely self-contained worlds of their own. Often when we see the scale of the Imperium and the conflicts which take place within it as being overwhelming, even difficult to describe or illustrate at a true scale, this leaves us feeling disconnected and far from being immersed in the world, because we're unable to truly visualize or logically relate to the occurrences, events and characters within. This is a reality that has long left many seeking a more focused human microcosm of the broader conditions seen within the 40k verse. A world such as Necromunda fulfills this role, and also more recently, as I take every opportunity to mention, the Warhammer crime series, which is set upon Alecto within the hive city of Varangantua. Each is very different from the other, but with common similarities of peeling back the veneer of the Imperium and exposing the raw flesh of human existence below. And just a small reminder that whenever we start a new ongoing series, if you do want to see more, please help me out and hit the like, as it lets me know to move more content in this direction. And if you're intrigued or have your own perspective, please do take it down to the comments. As we say goodnight to those within the Lutin Sleep Club, I want to remind briefly that Necromunda is of course also a tabletop game, just as is 40k. Yet unlike 40k, Necromunda is one that allows a more accessible entry point, plus endless creativity within one's own imagination for it, because it is at a more focused scale. Every shot, every swing of a melee weapon feels as if it could turn the tide of the engagement, and there is just generally a lot more flexibility in using your imagination to create individual characters, conversions, custom gangs and so on. Necromunda has also seen constant support for its game system and has a very extensive line of incredibly detailed models, most of which I pick up simply because the opportunity to not construct your own hive war with endless custom scenarios is one that I would never wish to miss. But like 40k, Necromunda is something I've been interested in for a very long time. And Necromunda of course originates way back into the halcyon days of the second edition of 40k, and we still await even the return of some gangs and figures from those times, if we will ever see them again. However, it is very exciting for anybody who is immersed in Necromunda to see the return recently of the Spirers, and even more so that the game and therefore the lore will soon be expanding to another hive city upon Necromunda, Hive Secundus. And this is really especially exciting because Necromunda was always pretty dark. It's got gang war in the depths of a hive city, all the adjacent activities that could entail and that you could wish to create. But now with Hive Secundus appearing, we're entering into a different world. This is a shattered hive city that's been overrun by elements of Xenos and has in effect collapsed completely. So we'll soon have the opportunity to explore the depths of a broken hive city, which, like I say, is very significantly exciting for me. Not to mention having an excuse and a reason to craft, paint and custom design the terrain, the models, the scenarios that you would be playing. And in terms of the world people are living in, at its core the 40k opening statement highlights that in a galaxy of constant war, whatever happens, you will not be missed. or thereabouts. I'm paraphrasing off the top of my head, but this is entirely true of human life in the Imperium. Billions perish daily, few if any of their names, lives or deeds will ever go recorded or known outside of the very few members within their close circle of daily life. Yet, while the Adeptus Terra would speak about humanity over its million worlds, these worlds vary greatly in both form and function. Some are sparsely populated agri-worlds dedicated to producing food for the more populous planets, others are mineral-rich mining worlds, barren research stations, military observation posts, imperial bastions. Many will have also mixed economies, maintaining a degree of self-sufficiency and autonomy as long as their governors pay tithes and enforce imperial laws, the most crucial of which are aimed at curtailing the uncontrolled explosion of mutant psychers, which, just as a side note, I feel this is another detail of the Imperium which is not often adequately related, similarly to the fact that despite all the grand war campaigns fought against the Xenos and Heretic, the Imperium is chiefly concerned with suppressing and maintaining control against its own people and any who seek to rebel against its authority. But psychers are another key concern, most especially since the opening of the Cicatrix Maledictum and the increased rate of psychers now appearing in humanity. For just as occurred during the Age of Strife, unrecorded or undetected rogue human psychers are extraordinarily dangerous to planet systems and the Imperium itself, even if they mean no harm personally. Hive worlds are of themselves critical to the Imperium. This is largely due to their industrial might, feeding the Imperium's unquenchable demand for manufactured goods, not to mention the supply of the most critical resource for the Imperium, human lives. True Hive worlds feature multiple, vast, towering metal cities, many of which will have spires that breach the upper atmosphere of a planet. As I've mentioned before though, and as I think I incorrectly termed in a past video, Hive cities are not true arcologies, for they do not exist in a balanced relationship with their environment, which is what an arcology is. Because Hive cities themselves are very often the cause, in the ancient past, of the complete collapse of a planetary ecology. It's common to see many Hive world surfaces as nothing more than ashen, polluted wastelands, barren plains from generations of mining and uncontrolled output of toxic industrial byproducts. With populations often exceeding the tens through to as high as 1,000 billion on a planet the size of Terra, Hive worlds cannot sustain themselves naturally for the most part. There are always exceptions, but most will require considerable amounts of import. They rely on the billions of tons of imported goods, meaning just as in the past for humanity as in the Age of Strife, the threat of any lengthy disruption in supply could risk massive destabilization and the destruction of worlds. Human citizens within a hive already exist only to live short, grueling lives, and so most have little to lose, unless they join the numerous gangs and the outcasts and attempt to better themselves somehow. Planetary supply disruption, then, would likely lead first to brutal extortion of the population by its gangs, guilds and clans, before turning into eventually uncontrollable, hunger-mad uprisings, with billions turning into cannibalistic frenzies, which always echoes the chaos and the desperation depicted in, for example, something like Soylent Green, which I always think has darker reverberations than most give it credit for, because many are caught up in its admittedly more silly aspects, but overall it's a very bleak illustration of where humanity can head toward, as was most science fiction in the 1970s. And it's dealing with quite a serious concept where what happens when a planetary ecosystem begins to enter a fully unstoppable state of collapse, and the bureaucracy have figured this out, but they don't really know what to do about it, and they know that if people know, it's going to lead to basically a mass panic and societal collapse. Internal districts of a hive city are isolated from the outside world. They're illuminated only by glow globes and optic cables running from the sunlight spire pinnacles. These weak light shafts barely penetrate the hive's dim catacombs, which usually resemble ancient corridors of Gothic structures, more akin to an industrialized, decaying cathedral nave. Air will be circulated through ducts from the upper layers, supposedly filtering through purification plants to remove fumes, although these likely have very variable rates of operational success, and sometimes that may be down to who is paying for it. Descending further into the deepest parts of a hive city, most especially its underhive, it's all too common to see such air ducts fail entirely, so the environment here accumulates stale air, fumes and other pollutants, and this can make sectors in the forgotten areas of a hive city necessitate personal respirators to just merely survive. The outer shell of the hive itself serves as both skin and defense, pierced with vertical and angled shafts, admitting additional light and air where possible, feasible and necessary. This shell also houses inter-spire travel tunnels, gateways, fortresses, defense installations, including defense weaponry such as giant lasers capable of striking orbital targets. One of the shell's primary functions is also to shield against the fierce ash storms, which can easily strip away outer layers, requiring constant maintenance. Any human individual caught outside the hive during ash storms would be simply stripped to the bone, as many of these contain considerable amounts of silica, which is essentially glass, and it will just cut through even armour down to the bone, often disintegrate an individual. Travelling back in further, at the heart of each spire is a vertical shaft, which is commonly referred to as the heat sink. This extends from the spire's topmost levels down through to the planet's crust. It's usually a plasteel tube, and it converts planetary heat into the power for the spire's manufactories and hab layers. It's controlled by powerful clans and guilds, as is almost everything in a hive, and these heat sinks will generate considerable income from the power users, creating a feudal economy where clans operate as producers, suppliers and consumers. But only the upper hab layers receive regulated power service, which is managed by secure control stations. For the inhabitants, life at any level below the upper third of a hive is grueling and heavily stratified. Those living closest to the core will endure dim, claustrophobic, choking, hot conditions, while the outer shell dwellers face constant threats from the environmental hazards and even invasions from mutants and rambling scavengers. The power and air supply inequalities unsurprisingly directly reflect the broader social hierarchies, with the upper hab residents enjoying relative comfort, something that could be even perhaps qualified as approaching middle-class living, compared to those below certainly, who live lives of grinding poverty, barely above indentured servitude. Worse still is life for those within the harsh existence of the underhive, which is for all intents and purposes a permanent war zone. So unsurprisingly, it is the majority of a hive's population which belongs to this indentured worker class, and who will primarily reside in vast, overcrowded hab zones. These workers will live in pretty dismal squalor, whilst the elite of the spires have that life of luxury. And while those in the lower levels are generally easily marshalled by threats of violence, authority and restrictions, those who direct the forces of the status quo at any level are always aware that should a full hive war erupt, the sheer volume of humans within the lower levels would very likely be unstoppable should a true rebellion begin. And for that reason, it is why you often will see Sororitas, Imperial Guard and even Astartes maintain some level of cursory presence on a hive world. For while they may seem to be simply vast human ant colonies that consume and waste at equally shocking scale, in truth they are one of the Imperium's most valuable assets, and so have to be kept as stable as possible. And yes, individual families do exist in hive spires. How do you think they have such massive population output? Unsurprisingly, anyone's family position in the spire directly reflects their social standing. The top levels are inhabited by the hive nobility, who enjoy the natural light, fresh air of a sort and imported luxury food. Below them, a steadily decreasing scale of social level through to the twilight levels, which offer dim, barely adequate daylight, the recycled air, recycled food. The deeper you go, the more depleted everything is, the more reused everything is. And often, those within the lower levels of a hive city are reliant on very, very questionable sources of sustenance, including notorious starch cubes. For with any hive city, mass-scale recycling is a way of life, something that extends even to the populace themselves. The industrial complexes provide a variety of items which are traded to other planets in exchange for food. Hive cities are not forge worlds, but they very often have massive manufacturing ability. And this trading economy is very vital for the exchange of food to feed a hive city's massive population. These manufactories extend from usually lower hab zones down to the ashen wastes themselves, because over millennia the waste from these manufactories has formed this rising layer of wasteland and ash around a city, and it gradually begins to bury the lower factories because they have no means by which to move it out. And the lower levels are usually then a maze of waste pipes, drains which expel toxic waste and dangerous gases. The scale of these operations are awe-inspiring to a degree, and they render human workers truly insignificant compared to the grand industrial scale architecture. all of which is controlled by various clans or guilds, even hive gangs. Usually these occupy a structure approaching a feudal system of obligations, trading raw materials and components as the powerful clans, most particularly within Primus the 6 clan houses, who act as intermediaries regulating the supply and demand of utilities, resources, production and so on. Within the greater clans, it's often in their own interests to form alliances for stability, but conflicts over resources and territory can often lead to inter-clan feuds, fueling notorious gang warfare. Because workers are seen as valuable resources. Living close to the manufactories, their daily lives consist of shift rotations in and out of the factorums, often within walking distance of their residences. In fact, their lives are so consumed by these roles that it's quite common to see some human workers featuring crude surgical adaptations to more efficiently perform specialized fabrication tasks. This will likely have been made in an effort to make that said individual more valuable, less expendable, and such a physical sacrifice will come with minimal perks, and for any whose lives are condemned to such a world, you just take what you can get. So it's very much in their interests in a population of billions to make yourself stand out, even if that is through the process of quite risky surgery. Hive manufactorums, though, are continually difficult to maintain, as are most things within a hive city. It's observed that the ashen deserts surrounding hive cities directly impact the practical servicing of manufactories, and sometimes this is to such a degree it becomes impractical to continue maintaining a manufactorum entirely. The cost of clearance and disposal far exceeds the output value of the factory, and this is how entire sections of a lower hive city become simply abandoned by a greater clan. New manufactories will soon replace those lower hab zones, and thus newer upper habs extend higher, thereby constantly moving things upward and renewing the spires. This obviously doesn't happen quickly, it's not a matter of weeks, months, maybe even years. The timescale can vary wildly, but the process is established within most hive cities, and it is what eventually leads to the dangerous abandoned zones filled with derelict machinery, which inevitably will become infested with scavies, the mutant gangs who scavenge a living from the hive scraps of the human population, which may well often include the human population themselves. So these abandoned sections below the hive's functioning levels essentially are what constitute what is described as the underhive. This is the abandoned area of a hive city. It's often seen as a mixture of ancient network ruins, abandoned fabrication and hab districts, and extensive tunnels which predate the contemporary hive structure. These areas are heavily contaminated and usually inhabited by the worst aspects of society, outcasts, criminals and worse. And these areas are the battlegrounds for the proxy wars of the greater clan houses. Because the greater houses in a hive city will not engage in actual conflict themselves, they will use lower level gangs to fight out their conflicts and disrupt the processes of others. Lower than this still, at the very lowest point, you have what's called the hive bottom. This exists as a structurally dangerous zone of crumbling rubble and toxic effluents. It's usually below the designated surface of a planet. And within many hive cities' lower levels, but within Primus specifically, you will find a radioactive lake known as the Sump. Here only the most monstrous mutants will be able to survive, and they even may occasionally venture upward into the underhive, or sometimes even the lower city, for the horror of all. The sheer size of a hive city and its constant state of death and renewal truly reflects humanity's relentless expansion across the galaxy in the Imperium. Because these megastructures are not just cities, they are entire worlds. They exhibit the diverse facets of human civilization, from the spires of the elite to the squalid underhives where the destitute struggle for survival. Nonetheless, unrest in the Imperium casts a shadow over Necromunda, as it does so many worlds. Just as the fires of rebellion have already been seen to grow within the ashen wastes which surround Hive Primus, not to mention the threat of Xenos raiders circling in the void and long rumours of Xenos even within the Hive cities. The unmentionable risks posed by the ruinous powers remain ever enduring, even as the pocket-hidden cabals and covens across the planet may slide into the peripheral or even outright worship of chaos itself. Hive cities encapsulate life for humanity in M41. They are the Indomitable Imperium, the grandeur and misery, the resilience and frailty, the inequities paired against the furious need to survive seen within lives framed by the human condition. within its towering spires down to the darkest depths of its underhives. In Necromunda, we see this reflection of humanity's greatest strengths and its deepest flaws. Hive Primus and Necromunda are in a plethora of ways symbolic templates which define humanity's place in the galaxy and the boundaries of its existence set against the grim darkness of the far future. As is often the case, the view to which we, as an external entity, see the world of the Imperium is entirely impossible for those actually living in that time and space. It's why I often note the necessity to view things from an individual scale, or within the limitations that would be placed upon you within the in-fiction environment. The perspective of worlds who are aligned with the Imperium of mankind are one such example of this. And it's something that has been illustrated throughout many novels, that when an investigatory group of Astartes, Imperial Guard, Inquisition, or otherwise arrive upon a world, they soon discover that the facade which has been communicated often conceals a far more complex, fragile, and even dangerous situation. It's certainly no different when it comes to the world of Necromunda, and perhaps even more so, for it is a truly complex world. Hive cities are so vast they're generally unable to be managed by a singular force, infrastructure apparatus, or even bureaucratic body. Although there will be those with the capability to exert power, claim dominance over a hive itself, it's not uncommon for that person, the council, group, or otherwise to have some level of permanent oversight. But this is not only due to the sheer difficulty in managing a city of such scale, it's quite honestly equally due to the fact that those with the power to control a hive city have very little interest on what takes place below the spire, so long as it does not impede or threaten their position. And of course, they will have relevant loyal forces scattered throughout the lower levels and zones, agents, to ensure that they have pertinent intelligence to take action where it's necessary, to confront greater clans where necessary. But it also cannot be underscored just how vast hive cities are. Even with fairly committed intentions, it can prove extremely difficult to understand just what is occurring within certain areas of a hive city at any given time. One good example would be, for example, Vigilus. When some plague marines arrived on that planet, they jumped off ship and immediately descended into the hive, and masses of Imperial forces, including Astartes, were just unable to discover their whereabouts, and this created a massive problem. And that factor alone makes hive cities very dangerous for the Imperium. It's very problematic for Inquisitors, for example, to truly get down to the root cause, which is why they often have a somewhat carpet-bombing approach to dealing with issues, because hive cities are a very strange double-edged sword for the Imperium. They represent these most fertile grounds to bolster their military forces and in many respects demonstrate the power and the resilience, like I've said, of humanity, the empire of the Imperium. At the same time, they're this extremely dangerous breeding ground for heretical cults, Xenos alike, even just plain human rebellion. And that of course is why the forces of the Imperium, like the Inquisitors, Ecclesiarchy, the Sororitas, the Imperial Guard, would tend to have a pretty strong presence throughout the Imperium, certainly upon hive worlds, because their duty is endless. And as we've noted many times before, humanity is in fact one of the greatest threats to the Imperium itself. For whilst those of the warp of the Xenos are equally high-risk, nightmare-inducing existential threats, the risks presented by and within human populations are certainly of equal concern, and this has been illustrated across many historical campaigns where the collapse of a single world or a system sparks a contamination that spreads far and wide and can end up dragging in vast amounts of Imperial military resources to neutralize a situation. And that is really the crux of the matter. The management of hive cities, the depths within, it can spark an explosion of disruption for the Imperium, which can end up wasting absolutely massive amounts of resources. And that's why Inquisitors tend to deal with issues within a hive city, within a planet, more brutally, because they understand the big picture, they understand the scale, and that if they allow this situation to spiral out of control, it could consume entire systems. Thankfully, it's not all a massively problematic situation, because hive cities are often very resilient to threats. This is due to the sheer mass of workers being concerned largely with just completing their day, consuming before the next cycle. They're also coordinated and unified by the ecclesiarchy and all the rules which contain it, and those bodies, those religious structures of the Imperium are very good at encouraging the followers of the Imperial cult to keep an eye on what everybody else is doing. It obviously leads to massive scales of injustice where a neighbour might tell on their neighbour because they don't like them and that person ends up getting executed, but in the big picture of the Imperium it keeps things more stable because usually people are prone to giving information about what they see and what is going on. So human coordination, unity and power are all key features in maintaining the order of a hive city. And with that in mind, one of the most notable icons within Necromunda and Hive Primus is what is known to the masses as the Eye of Helmor, or it's more fatalistically termed as the Death Clock. This is the great horologium of Necromunda, and its purpose is to inform industrial helots as well as shift overseers in every detail of the world's industrial output at a glance. The face of the horologium tells a myriad of truths, the most important to the average helot being the current work shift and expected targets. The central panel lists the hive refined by zone and sector, and workflow is graded according to a complex set of parameters ranging from unacceptable to treacherous, as well as a stack of further data which is readable only by the senior shift overseers and industrial commissars. This can include, where relevant, expenditure, wastage, yield, tolerance, average psychopathology, and current worker maladjustment grades. An experienced shift overseer should be able to near instantly gauge the situation in their workplace and determine exactly just how many helots to execute, punish, or otherwise make an example of in order to meet current targets. The lives of the ordinary humans of Hive Primus are therefore largely beholden at the broadest scale to one Imperial commander, Lord Gerontius Helmor. He is the governor of Necromunda and presides over a world his ancestors have ruled for at least 7,000 years. His dominion exists as a complex web of factions, including, like we've said, powerful noble families, gang connections, greater clans, guilds, and so on. Lord Helmor stands atop of this feudal hierarchy, and it's necessary to manipulate their factions upon the world at every level by expertly and selectively offering and withdrawing support to ensure loyalties and eliminate any immediate or rising threats. And managing that is the only way one would maintain power, because the noble families of Necromunda live in those spires. Their status is marked by luxury and influence. But these elite groups are engaged in constant political manoeuvring, and that extends to even espionage, efforts to undermine one another and lose face, even assassinations. And that could be even within one's own family. The nobility of any hive city will see their fortunes rise and fall with the hive's overall status and even the planet's status. And all of that is tied to the oversight of their planetary commander or governor. All the while, in the shadows and lower levels of a hive, gangs will rule through violence and intimidation, fighting the proxy wars of the elite. And these, whilst seemingly nothing more than feral thugs and criminals, the gangs can often be backed by the noble houses, even used to protect their interests and territories. It's not unusual, although it might sound unusual, that these gangs will see recruitment drives for the Astra Militarum and even Space Marine chapters, and it might seem counterintuitive. But it's due to the fact that they will be fighting against the worst enemies known to humanity, and as such they will seek the toughest, most self-reliant youths for the Imperium's war efforts, and anybody that can survive in the lower levels of a hive and make a name for themselves is certainly a candidate for these Imperial military forces. At the opposite end of the scale, Lord Helmor himself must periodically provide entire regiments from his personal guard, which remains also a testament to Necromunda's reputation in producing formidable warriors. Another key aspect of governance extends to controlling, as I said in the beginning, the number of psychic mutants or psychers within a hive, because those individuals pose significant dangers, potentially becoming hosts for demonic entities, attracting otherworldly threats like the Tyranids, and managing this perilous task is entirely critical, because unchecked psychers could lead to total societal collapse. So long as he is fulfilling his obligations, including supplying resources and troops, Helmore is able to maintain this secure position within the Imperium's vast feudal network. But power held is never seen as being unattainable by others, and upon Necromunda, the wealthy and the powerful great houses consisting of Helmore, House Catalus, House Tai, House Ulanti, House Grime, House Ranlo and House Koran all derive their wealth from the trade that occurs on and between Necromunda and the other worlds. So any power struggles to overthrow the ultimate house are very dangerous, because to do so would destabilize the world and it would destabilize their own income streams. It would also mean the other houses could turn against them because they also would understand the risk that is being presented to all. This is perhaps why in many thousands of years the House of Helmore has not been overthrown. It's also not uncommon for the nobility to really wish to spend their artificially extended lifespans away from a hive world. This is why luxury planets, garden worlds, paradise worlds exist, because the nobility, the elites, quite enjoy spending time away from the hive cities and the purity of these worlds, despite the relative opulence of the spires. So the great noble houses function primarily as investors. They really produce nothing and offer no services themselves. They're more like sponsors. And to remain profitable, they will require favour from Helmore, as I said, to secure the landing, the shipping rights, the trade licenses, tithe, concessions. But even as they will rely upon him, they'll also scheme against him, because they hope one day to see the household replaced by a new imperial house. And all of this is very typical for an imperial hive world, but despite all of those aspirations, that kind of change around is so disruptive you rarely ever see it happen. Beneath the noble houses though, where you will see more change occur, are the clan houses. These are kind of like the middle management. They're responsible for maintaining Necromunda's vast manufacturing base. Each house, whether a great house or a clan, has its own cultural traditions, distinctive linguistic traits even within a hive city, codes of dress, behaviour, unique concerns, aptitudes, and so on. Although they are very antagonistic towards one another, their interdependence for specific and rare items or services creates a fragile balance which few would really wish to disrupt. And that ensures that any sponsor patriarchs, merchant families from above who have invested interests tied to the great houses surely pay very close attention to the goings on below. For down in the lower depths of the hive and the underhive are where the real balances of power can be shifted more easily with a blade and a rifle in place of a pen and a coin. And that intricate web of power, influence and treachery forms the foundational existence of life upon Necromunda, or indeed so many hive worlds, where a relentless struggle of the hive city's inhabitants is ever present, be they peon scum of the manufactorums or noble members of a great house living off-world in the most disgustingly decadent luxury. But all of the happenings at the middle and upper level are why the lower levels of a hive city are effectively in this state of ongoing war between massive gangs. Across the planet of Necromunda, there exists not a single, but in fact multiple hive cities. This is very typical for a hive world, where you may find clusters of hive cities. This may see a single major hive surrounded by smaller subsidiary hives within a cluster, and other cities further away will be then connected by some kind of ancient high-speed transport system built at some time in their history at when anybody would guess. Hive guilds will often also usually run heavily guarded land trains to transport bulk materials between cities. It's typical on many Imperial worlds for hive cities to be of variable operational status, and there are innumerable reasons as to why a hive could fall into a state of disrepair or low status, from cult disruptions, Xenos problems, even system trade wars and political power struggles, not to mention just standard war. Upon Necromunda, the most powerful hive city and focus for the core narrative, as we've said, is Hive Primus. For Primus is the grandest and oldest hive on the war-torn world of Necromunda. It stands as the ancestral stronghold of Lord Helmore, the Imperial Commander, and this hive is known planet-wide as the Palatine. This hive is the jewel of the Palatine cluster, and at its pinnacle, the central and tallest spire, lies the palace of Lord Helmore. Comparative to many hive cities, Hive Primus is in very good condition. In fact, it's renowned for its breathtaking architecture, a blend of grandeur and magnificence unrivaled elsewhere on Necromunda. This is due to its wealth because it houses the only shipyard and landing field capable of accommodating orbital carriers, making it the planet's sole spaceport. And locked in geostationary orbit 100 kilometers above Hive Primus is the Ring of Selene. This is one of the busiest orbital trading depots in the Segmentum Solar. It serves as Necromunda's sole shipping nexus, and it ensures that all goods are authorized by the Imperial houses. Supplies are sent down to Primus and distributed to other hives in exchange for their manufactured goods. And despite its apparent inefficiency, this system effectively maintains House Helmor's undeniable power because this crucial infrastructure ensures exclusive control over off-world trade and also trade on the planet, which is immensely important and immensely powerful. A significant feature of Hive Primus is also the fortress monastery of the Astartes, the Imperial Fists. This is also where the headquarters of the Adeptus Arbites, the Imperial Law Enforcement Agency, is located within the Hive, and thus all ensures strict adherence to the Emperor's laws. The presence of the Imperial Fists are another factor in ensuring the stability of the planet, and again the power of Helmor both on the world and as seen externally by the Imperium. On the outskirts of the Hive lies a unique spire designated for abhumans and the occasional, very covert sanctioned Xenos, who are then permitted to trade here. This area hosts a variety of visitors, including the Squats and Eldar. They are accommodated on separate levels, adding to this whole world's cosmopolitan nature. The upper echelons of the Palatine Hive then are a melting pot of culture, making it the most diverse on Necromunda. But this is carefully managed because the balance of power within Hive Primus is to be meticulously maintained. Any attempts to disrupt that equilibrium would be swiftly and ruthlessly suppressed. For Hive Primus is not just a hive, it's a symbol of Helmor's legacy and a beacon of order amid the chaos of Necromunda. Its towering spires and infinite depths tell the stories of power, control, brutality, and a relentless pursuit of dominance. But there are many other features of Necromunda. One of these would be the so-called Forbidden Cities. These are military tunnels linking Necromunda's hives which run deep beneath the Ashen Wastes, and they were designed to allow troop movements during invasions. Their guarded ramp shafts provide hive access, though unauthorized entry is possible through heat sinks and air vents. Under the hives, storage depots and bunkers would hold synthetic food and raw materials for wartime use. These ancient tunnels and bunkers are very often entirely abandoned now and predate the contemporary massive hives. Most Necromundians dismiss the Forbidden Cities as myth, but the ancient bunkers house decaying corpse-starch depots used to make ghast. And due to the power and popularity of this drug, the nobility and ruling dynasty control its production. They use subordinate clans and paramilitary forces to process it, and the Forbidden Cities embellished with wealth from ghast trade feature ornate halls and mosaics becoming palaces of archaic splendour. Workers often are press-ganged from underhive scum or brought from nomad slavers, supervised then by underhive gangs in the processing and production of this. Ghast exploitation brings immense wealth and the lifestyle of the lords of the Forbidden Cities, who are either exiled nobles or adventurers connected to the established nobility. These individuals will disappear from the upper spires, left to manage ghast production in the hidden bunkers. But little else is known about the lifestyle or truly what goes on in these places which are entirely out of sight and out of control of Imperial authorities. Then we come to, yes, Hive Secundus, which hopefully we will soon be learning considerably more about. There was a time when Hive Secundus was known as the Jewel of Necromunda. It was a centre of learning and enlightenment, a rare bright spot amid the ceaseless struggles of the dark future. But this changed over a century ago when tech priest biologist Hermiatus conducted unsanctioned research on gene stealers within its walls. To the surprise of none, the plan went disastrously awry, and the hive became riddled with Xenos corruption, leading to its total collapse. House Helmor first attempted though to retake the hive and contain the disaster, fearing his failure to do so could risk Necromunda being subjected to exterminatus. They erected a giant perimeter wall and established permanent surveillance from the planetary defense forces. Even the Imperial Fists were involved at one point, However, as the cult grew in power and audacity, the then Lord Helmore resorted to a drastic measure. He bombarded the Hive from orbit with graviton missiles. The bombardment collapsed the Hive's central spire, toppling it to form a shattered column across 10 kilometers of the wastes. The accumulated mass of millennia sank deep into the ground, and despite this overwhelming response, the Xenos infection survived, now transformed by the weaponry into something new and horrible, known as the Mal strain. With the planetary defense batteries depleted, a ring of trenches and redoubts was established around the ruins. This defensive perimeter is manned by conscripts and penal troops from across the world and grows denser every year. It is said that nothing can escape this ring of steel, but maintaining it requires relentless resources and vigilance. What occurs within Hive Secundus today is unknown. Many believe the Xenos creatures continue to breed within the shattered Hive, engaged in a constant war of survival with whatever remnants of the descendants still survive within. But those survivors surely now exist only as feral savage gangs, long abandoned by their fellow Necromundans. Hive Secundus is a dark, grim reminder of the perils which lurk within the depths of Necromunda and are kept well out of sight and well out of mind, certainly of the broader Imperium. Although Hive Primus today holds this monopoly on off-world trade, it wasn't always Necromunda's sole gateway. Gothrel's Needle was a spire rivaling Hive Primus and was once a major spaceport adorned with docking platforms and orbital stations. Unlike the autocratic Primus, Gothrel's Needle was governed democratically by an elected council, ensuring fair treatment and safety. This being seen as a threat by other Hive's houses meant they long sought to destabilise Gothrel, starting with cutting off its orbital trade and progressing to a protracted shadow war. And just as an adjacent note, I think this is something to be aware of, because often we talk about the Imperium as being this dystopian, authoritarian system. The Imperium certainly is that, the broad Imperium of the galaxy. That is how it functions. But individual planets and individual systems do not have to adhere to that system, which I think is something people get quite regularly confused about within 40k. Just because the Imperium operates that way, it doesn't mean that individual planets can basically run themselves however they want to. Individual Hive cities can run themselves however they want to. The Imperium doesn't care about that. The Imperium cares about them adhering to the Imperial tithe and doing what they're told. So it creates this very bizarre situation where you could have, as is described here, a democratic Hive city. You could have a democratic planet. The Imperium is fine with that, so long as you do what they say. And so it creates this bizarre juxtaposition where you have kind of one system overseeing another. And often that can create, obviously, a conflict. And in the past that has happened. There are some great novels which illustrate that. And usually that situation is resolved quite quickly when the diplomat, the inquisitor, whoever arrives at the world says, hey listen, you need to do what I'm asking you. And they will say, well why? We've been doing this for generations, why should we listen to what you say? And he says, well, you see this gigantic space marine standing beside me? That's why you're going to do what I say. But again, as I talked about recently with Slaanesh, as I've mentioned with Warhammer Crime, as I mentioned with my own background for House Lutin, my Night Force and what occurred on the planet between the Hive cities there, this kind of shadow war, this industrial espionage which occurs within Hive cities, that's the human aspect of 40k, which to me is really, really interesting and something I want to see a lot more of. And the interesting aspect of what occurred with Gothrel's Needle was that because it was governed democratically, gangs and warfare were banned, and they only tolerated clan households if they were controlling their population. Now, despite this, criminal activity thrived in its lower Hive levels, and those gangs would continually challenge the volunteer enforcer cadres of Gothrel. House Delac, led by Psyche Guvros, is a key destabilizer and would conduct sabotage and murder from the depths. Guvros's raids on the upper levels made him a legend, attracting Delac gangs from other hives. And these raids continue even to this day. Despite the Democratic Council of Gothrel appearing to be the household's ultimate enemy, it doesn't stop them fighting among themselves, especially if the destabilization on behalf of the gang Delac continues to occur and the perceived fall of the Hive government draws ever nearer. They all want to be ready to swoop in and take as much power as possible. Some gangs even fight on the side of Gothwall, hoping to tip the scales back against their rivals should any of them seem too close to claiming that victory. Thus, this shadow war for Gothwall's Needle rages on, never quite finding resolution. Also, I know a separate shadow war continues to rage on around the pronunciation of that gang name. Some say Delac, some say Delac. I have always said Delac. Hive Tracia, affectionately known as the Three Sisters in the local Necromundan dialect, earns its name from the trio of colossal spires that dominate its skyline. These spires serve as a beacon for travellers journeying across the desolate Great Equatorial Waste from the south. Positioned as the southernmost frontier hive of the illustrious Palatine cluster, Tracia stands as a gateway between the more settled hives and the untamed wilds. It's a bustling commerce hub hosting many significant merchant clans. Its strategic location makes it the primary trading depot for convoys travelling to and from the southern hive clusters. However, the lure of wealth attracts more than just traders. It also attracts nomadic raiders from the wastelands who constantly menace the trade convoys, creating a persistent thorn in the side of Tracia's denizens. The industrial heart of Hive Tracia is dominated by the industrious subclans of House Orlok, known for their expertise in manufacturing and logistics. Recently, however, House Goliath has also been making inroads into Tracia's furnace sectors, their hulking enforcers bringing the muscle and might to the Hive's industrial efforts. Above the grime and toil of the lower levels, the upper spires of Tracia are infamous for the presence of brat gangs. These gangs consist of the rebellious offsprings of noble families who find cruel amusement in gang warfare against the lower hive's residents. These brats are notorious for their flamboyant and rare jet bikes, which they race through the hive's thoroughfares and transit tubes, leaving chaos in their wake. The sight of these brightly painted bikes is a dreaded omen for commoners below. But Tracia's unique blend of high-stakes commerce, industrial prowess, and noble decadence paint a vivid picture of life in a frontier hive. Their spires not only stand as symbols of wealth and power, but also as watchtowers against ever-present threats within the surrounding wasteland. And whether it's the relentless march of industry, cutthroat trade, or the thrill-seeking exploits of youth, Hive Tracia embodies the dynamic, often dangerous spirit of Necromunda's frontier. The Acropolis Hive, an old and ornate hive in the Palatine cluster, is situated at a crucial intersection of major road tunnels, making it also a key trade hub on Necromunda. It's home to powerful merchant clans with existing trading networks and attracts sprawling shanties desperate to share its wealth. The great houses maintain a presence here, generally supporting the status quo. However, House Delac thrives on trading information and intrigue, profiting from any merchant's internecine wars. The Quinspirus cluster is situated on the edge of a virtually solidified sludge sea called the World Sump Ocean. At one time, when this sea was still existent and navigable, the entire area included immense dockyards which were basically unending. But near to all of these now remain buried deep within the undercity of the centrally located Quinspirus Hive, which has 5 great spires, hence the moniker, which means 5 towers in the local dialect, and gives its name to the whole cluster. The cavernous warehouses of ancient waterfronts have been the scene of many savage gang warfares to unlock the potential wealth within, in particular between the gangs subservient to House Orlok and Delac. As upon any hive world, Necromunda's hives, like its ruling dynastic houses, experience very fluctuating fortunes. Hive Mortis, once an industrial powerhouse, thrived with wealth and high tithe standing at one point. Its tunnels buzzed with the labour of millions of workers. A subtle plague began infecting the underclasses, and whilst initially dismissed as seasonal mortality spikes, when the deaths became undeniable and uncontrollable, Lord Helmore sealed Hive Mortis by imperial order. The plague ravaged the hive for years, decimating, it said, over 20 million souls and causing chaos as the great houses fought for power. Entire sections were sealed off, filled with corpses. Now, eventually the plague burned itself out and the hive was reopened. But now, Hive Mortis thrives not on machinery, but on the industry of death. With a significant percentage of viable workforce gone, the ruling houses turned to mortuary cults, harvesting and processing what corpses remained. House Escher has risen to dominance, extracting drugs from bodies through their Death Maiden gangs who face fierce competition. Despite its changed nature, the Hive's conflicts continue. Small communities live in fear within the vast empty domes, wary of travellers and the plague's return. Their industry collapsed. Gangs meanwhile roam the abandoned sectors, battling over vaults of corpses and untold vaults of industrial materials and wealth which could yet still be exploited and transported to other, more prosperous Hive cities. Then there is the Skull. This is a derelict hive and the largest of 3 remote ruined hives. Its collapsed remains now resemble a skull with gaping holes marking out the key eye sockets. It's a famous landmark rumoured to be worshipped by its local Ashen Waste nomads, but the ruins are also said to have once been occupied by orc raiders, leading to the loss of contact with the cluster for several years, until a Space Marine contingent was dispatched to scour them. The campaign which followed destroyed the Hive cities, leaving them uninhabitable. The structures themselves are destroyed to such an extent as to be now unrecoverable. They sit abandoned, choked with dust, slowly being consumed by the ashen wasteland of the planet. If there are any who inhabit the ruins now, they are surely the worst criminals or banished individuals, for these ruins are feared and avoided by most dwellers of the wastelands, including most nomads and scavies alike. So now we come to the core focus for 40k Necromunda, Gang War. This is of course more of an overview today, as we will get into each house clan in their own individual videos in the future. But despite Gang War being a term commonly thrown around when it comes to the lower hive of Necromunda, war among the clans is not necessarily as clear a picture as you might assume. The situation is far more nuanced than many in the galaxy of 40k, because the house clans also control entire areas of the lower hive. They engage with merchant guilds and work on behalf of or under the instruction of the more powerful great clans located in the upper hive, although not necessarily the spire. They may be referred to as the clan houses of Necromunda, but despite this title, they exist far below those greater houses. Consequently, they lack the privileges and status open to those far above them. For the ordinary hivers who exist within clan territory, their lives are equally uneasy, but their activities enable them to live something approaching contented lives of toil in the guild factories, workshops, industries that form the backbone of the hive economy. Each clan house will have a specific area of focus usually, but collectively they will produce a wide range of goods from foodstuffs to armaments, which are all traded both among themselves and with the great houses, and then off-world. A complex yet efficient trading relationship has evolved and is generally stable. It's characterized by competition among the clan houses to produce the goods and among the noble houses to then purchase these. Despite being in constant competition with one another, many clan houses rely on each other for some of their essential supplies and services, a dependency that's deliberately maintained by the highest authorities to ensure that the great houses control Necromunda's wealth. But within the lower hive, the 6 preeminent clan houses are House Cawdor, Escher, Goliath, Van Saar, Orlok, and House Delac, or if you prefer, House Delacay. Unlike the greater clans and noble houses though, these groups interact with one another at a pretty minimal level. It's a significant contrast to the more civilized clans because there is no need for niceties and diplomacy between the clans of the lower hive. It's common for disagreements or contested assets to be settled with a gun. Territory between their domains, as well as any stockpiled material wealth, are strictly and heavily guarded for this reason. And when territories meet, there usually will be an interposing dead zone or fortification between them, but even then, skirmish battles are commonplace. But prolonged warfare is rare, as disputes are typically settled through localized gang warfare and vendettas rather than full-scale house conflicts. This is quite often at the behest of their own leadership, who understand that while brutally intense engagements are tolerated, long drawn-out conflicts that could disrupt trade will not be tolerated by the great houses, and often they are acting under pressure from above. Because allowing a conflict to continue could draw powerful interventions that might even risk, at the least, profitable productions, and at the worst, their ability to exist from here on as a clan. At the small individual scale level violence that occurs between low-level gangers, this can be triggered by anything from accidental trespass to deliberate invasions, even the wrong words spoken. But the most common cause is just contract fighting, and this will occur when a house attempts to sabotage a neighbour's vital infrastructure, the focus generally being here to prevent a rival gang from fulfilling a contract and thereby incurring heavy penalties, potentially weakening them. But pure open hostility at random is quite rare because it's usually unconstructive and most often benefits the other houses and disrupts trade more than those who would initiate it. The great houses discourage destructive conflict, threatening to take their business elsewhere if they see this occurring, and this means that they will not tolerate hive wars, although not tolerating it does not necessarily mean that it will never occur. By and large though, hive cities remain mostly orderly and industrious, with the majority of residents content to work for their house and reap the modest rewards. Nonetheless, the 6 clan houses of Hive Primus command their derivative gangs, each controlling a territory or economic site of production, which could include again anything from food production to industry, even chem production. Sometimes it can take a darker turn, with the likes of made-to-order servitors or indentured workers for off-world requirements. But it's the low-level gang fighters who serve as the disposable soldiers in the endless hive proxy wars that play out continuously within the underhives. And while the term war is obviously quite broad, the conflicts you would most likely tend to see are scattered engagements equivalent to really unstable border wars and light skirmishing. Lesser clans within the hive will also exist, either as feudal subjects, outcasts and upstarts, but most will usually only control smaller areas within the lower hive. Very few would have the resources to match the power of the 6 dominant clan houses. Most are also living on borrowed time, unaware that at any point a major house could just decide to crush them and eliminate that threat. In the aftermath, most likely amalgamating the most valuable fighters into their own. So now let's briefly overview the 6 core clan houses of Primus. Firstly, Cawdor. House Cawdor is ruled by a court of senior nobles, with Lord Mormaer Cawdor holding the ceremonial rank of Thane. Considered the first among his equals, he sees himself as the foremost servant of the Emperor on Necromunda. But this causes tension with the existing Imperial House because Lord Cawdor privately refuses to acknowledge Helmor as anything other than a peer. Cawdor is what is referred to also as a pauper house, meaning despite its masters living in paranoid luxury, its people are scavengers and reclamators of holy relics deep in the Underhive. They venerate every scrap they reclaim, providing a vital recycling service to all and other houses. It's also one of the most populous houses on Necromunda because recruitment is very broad and has a very low bar. Its masses are then kept in line by strict devotions enforced by preachers. Because House Cawdor is the stronghold of the Cult of the Redemption, which predicts universal destruction, whatever that means, and this is an example of them being one of the bizarre offshoots of the Imperial religion. Of course, House Cawdor are not even the worst of these. But upon Necromunda, Cawdor has attempted to sanction this cult as an official religion, earning it the nickname the House of Redemption. Their beliefs forbid showing their faces in public, so they wear elaborate, often bizarre masks. And they also enforce a very strict code of conduct which sees any rule breakers becoming infidel outcasts, because those who don't follow the redemption are deemed worthless. But worse is the fact that some of the activities of the redemptionists create tension between Cawdor and the other houses. This is supposedly due to the rumour that Cawdor is supporting its redemptionist outlaws within other houses, and these are individuals known to be inflammatory and destabilising, something that is not wished or tolerated by other houses. And again, with all these households there is a lot more detail, but I'll get to that in future videos. House Escher are of course one of the most well-known clans within Hive Primus. They're led by the matriarch Primus, currently Queen Adina. Though young, Adina was primed for leadership from birth and quickly proved her mettle by effectively countering a major incursion from the rival House Goliath. She adeptly secured permission from the Imperial House to launch a counterattack and thereby stabilised her rule. The most obvious thing to note about Escher is that while most gangs remain relatively balanced in terms of their gender populations, with the exception of House Goliath perhaps, Escher society is dominated by women, and this is said to be the result of millennia's worth of exposure to their potent alchemical processes, which have supposedly inflicted irreparable genetic damage to the male lineage within their household. Breeding now said to occur through a chemical-induced asexual reproduction. Now, one might say, hold on now, in a hive city of billions, they can't find new male recruits? To which I would say, listen, hive citizen, that's some dangerous big thinking you've got going on there. You best stick to your work, unless you want to end up in the corpse starch lines. Less thinking, more working please, okay? Anyway, so House Escher thrives in leveraging their pharmaceutical production to maintain influence and power. They're basically a high-level chem-stim drug cartel. And that goes hand in hand with their well-known arrogance and their disdain for males of the population, especially Goliath, which regularly leads to frequent skirmishes, perhaps more so than with any other house clan in the city. Their wide range of exotic pharmaceuticals, from gene-enhancing elixirs to luxury drugs, have proved vital in maintaining the balance of power among the houses, and the growth hormones they supply to House Goliath and the rad purgatives to House Van Saar are just some of those, not to mention receiving considerable monetary wealth and raw biological materials in return. And then on top of these, the materials are used to create unique life forms as pets for themselves and to sell to spire-dwelling nobles. And then on top of that, there are the exports to the Upper Hive and Offworld, which are again extraordinarily lucrative. House Orlok are controlled by a loose alliance of numerous families, bound by pacts, bribery, marriage and murder. Each family dominates a portion of the house's resources, with Lord Morrow Orlok as the permanent head. But despite its fragmented leadership, Orlok remains one of the most unified and disciplined houses, experiencing remarkably few internal schisms. 5 years ago from the current period on Necromunda, it is said that Lord Hagen Orlok was assassinated by the Delac house, heightening tension between them. And this rivalry began when Orlok usurped a contract from House Delac by bribing Underhive gang raiders to destroy their fuel lines. Since then, both houses have sought to discredit each other at every opportunity, like for example Orlok being accused of their extensive mining causing areas to collapse and Ashen Hive quakes, which is said to have destroyed several of the hives. Orlok is also known as the House of Iron for its many mineral mines and ferrous slag pits across Necromunda's blasted surface. They'll extract metals and transport them to be processed in the hives and sent on to manufactories on or off-world. They control a significant wealth of mining facilities and vital land routes. They use tough outriders to defend ore convoys from the Ash Waste nomads and rival house agents. But those who belong to House Orlok itself and its base-level gangers lead relatively privileged lives comparative to average hivers and even other gangs. Most of Orlok's subjects are classed as basic hive manpower, meaning serfs who generally are sent for back-breaking shifts down into the mines and the refineries. But Orlok still remains overall one of the more stable households within Necromunda. The over-tyrant of House Goliath, Varan Gore, known as Gore Iron Eye, claimed his title by slaying his predecessor in ritual combat during a grand banquet attended by Lord Helmore. This brutal exchange of power is typical for House Goliath, where might equals right is taken very literally, and quite honestly wouldn't look out of place in orc politics. But unlike some of the more restrained clans, within Goliath the position of over-tyrant has changed hands thousands of times, each leader rising and falling through brutal to-the-death combat. As a group, Goliath's members are renowned almost singularly for their massive size and strength, with the style of dress emphasising this through weighted chains, spiked metal bracers, and basically they wouldn't look out of place in Mad Max 2 if you threw in some assless chaps. Comically, of course, as well, Goliath brutes rely on growth stims provided by their arch-rivals, Escher, to maintain these formidable body frames. And again, we can explore more in a house-specific video, but this really just highlights the bravado that exists between the houses at the lower ranks of a gang, when all among their leadership know full well that they ultimately depend upon one another in some shape or form, no matter what they might say outwardly. Goliath train new members through the use of refined techniques such as fighting pits and the Feast of the Fallen, which reinforce their violent and barbaric reputations among other houses. and I think if the World Eaters were still in loyal operation, they would be coming here to find new recruits. Goliath's inhabitants take pride in their gene-crafted ability to endure hardship. They view other hivers from houses as being soft, and despite all hivers being naturally robust, the Goliath's stubborn pride in this physical prowess is something that visually sets them apart. They see themselves as being superior simply due to their strength, even though many houses view them as being unsophisticated and highly unpredictable. But of course, there's something to be said for their pure physical strength. In a world where fights can break out at almost any time, it's not an uncommon situation to be close enough to simply break your opponent or smash their face in before they've had time to reach for their weapon. At a more practical level, Goliath operates many of Necromunda's great foundries, overseeing and providing workers who master the furnaces and the metal production fabs. The raw materials for this are traded from House Orlok's mining facilities, who Goliath have a better relationship with than most other clans. Goliath breed their workers to be the strongest and the toughest, and unsurprisingly their massive, often mentally unstable brutes are even larger than Space Marines due to the massive amount of chems they induce. In fact, so much so that there are those within Goliath who are considered an entirely classifiable strain of abhuman. Then we come to the mysterious House Delac. And I say this because how this house is ordered and administered remains unclear, even to its own members. The most senior nobles will meet in the secretive Star Chamber, where leadership rotates among several dozen senior nobles. The actual ruler's identity is always kept hidden. The house is also rumoured to use rare and expensive House Escher elixirs to create forced psychers, capable of hearing their foes' thoughts at great personal sacrifice. And they do this to provide valuable information to other houses, because information is their primary material asset. And in securing this, they will always reserve the most critical intelligence for the Imperial House of Helmor, cementing Delac as a critical house upon Necromunda. Their spies operate throughout the Hive, observing the activities of all others, but most especially their rival houses. Delac members' pale, bald-headed appearance and long coats with concealed weaponry contribute this reputation for espionage and double-dealing. Their whispered voices and light-sensitive eyes add to their unusual, eerie persona, with some rumoured to see spectrums even invisible to others. House Delac's territory is particularly dark, and this is reflected in their shrouded motives and their physical attributes. The other houses are very justifiably suspicious of House Delac at all times, whose agents are known to infiltrate and manipulate others behind the scenes. But the household benefits from a special understanding with Helmor, providing not just materials but the crucial information, which maintains their influence and ensures their survival amidst the complex politics of Hive Primus. Then lastly we come to House Van Saar, which as some of you may know is in fact one of my favourite groups within 40k. The Van Saar maintain a deeply ingrained sense of order among their number, and this dedication is ingrained deeply within their lineage. Their focus is upon producing highly advanced technological components that has brought them great wealth, yet the source of their prosperity is also their curse. It is slowly killing them even as they strive to maintain their house's dominance. And there is a lot more to their story, but it effectively lies with their possession of STC information, that is, Standard Template Construct. As such, this also dictates their clan structure, where the most senior families form an inner circle with access to the most advanced and most dangerous STC. The house itself is led by Duke Otto Van Saar XXII, a man as pale and withered as a corpse, yet incredibly dangerous. For the Van Saar maintain access to levels of technology that would very likely be of high desire to the Mechanicus, but the perception of the Van Saar is considerably concealed as much as possible by its members and likely even by the great clans and Helmor himself. Because were the wider Imperium to become aware of just what Van Saar possess, this could be extremely problematic not only for themselves, but for the entirety of Necromunda. Van Saar, due to the dangerous environment that slowly poisons them, must wear protective suits to filter their irradiated blood and ward off the effects of their own technology. This is a very grim irony, as it also fuels their determination to ensure the house's survival, even if it means sacrificing themselves. Meanwhile, the great houses will pay a premium for Van Saar's advanced technological components, making them one of the wealthiest houses in Primus. But despite their wealth, the Van Saar still depend on others for essential goods and services, particularly Escher for their rad purgatives and House Delac for sensor and communication equipment. Van Saar are one of the more pragmatic clans, far less prone to brutal displays of base violence like the Goliath. But as noted, the Gangs of Necromunda are truly only one small aspect to the entire picture. The level of lore detail and adjacent discussion that can be applied to just HIVE, Primus and Necromunda itself is truly massive. This today really is the tip of the iceberg, and it's of course why many of you have asked me to begin looking at it. So far this has just been a cursory level of consideration. But now also, with the approaching release again of HIVE Secundus, there will be ever more to explore, and it seemed an opportune time to begin a series that could proceed in really any order. Because once you have a general understanding of Necromunda and what a complex web of hive cities exists here, the rest can follow along however you see fit, which is much better for me than some of the other series like the Astartes, which I always feel overcomplicated and pressured in my mind as to how to order and proceed with that. In terms of its setting, similarly to the aforementioned Varangantua on an adjacent series of hive worlds, or for example within Rogue Trader, a small specific sector of the galaxy, focusing in like this opens up an almost endless space for exploring factions and individuals within, and more specifically at the human level, not one of the galaxy-spanning wars that generally define the Imperium. Necromunda and its setting enables a closer look at the inner workings of a hive city, the struggles, dangers and mysteries that lie within. And several of those clans or gangs within hold complex structures of power that are at some level integral to the operation of the city itself. This is also one of the best things about the game of Necromunda. The core game comes with a set of pre-established combat scenarios which enables you to do fairly generic combat situations between your gangs or whatever group you want to deploy, which could be Arbites, a squad of PDF exterminators, really anything you want to create. But then the deeper advanced game of Necromunda enables you to take things to a far more detailed RPG level, where each game continues the members of your gang and sees you paying for upgrades with the spoils of battles, and when a member of your gang perishes, they're gone until new members can be recruited and trained up. So if 40k has always seemed too big of a scale or too intimidating price-wise, Necromunda can be an interesting alternative, because not only does it bring the galaxy of M41 down to the human scale, it's simply far more accessible. One box usually provides you with everything you need to play out a game, and then you can just build up small elements over time if you want. Personally, I just find many of the 40k adjacent game systems to be greatly enjoyable, like Titanicus, which I absolutely love. And this is certainly not least because their rule systems stay far more stable than the core 40k game, which, as many people comment on so regularly, is so often updated and amended that it becomes a stressful headache, not so much with adjacent games. There is much more to discuss though when it comes to Necromunda and revealing the harrowing reality, the complex hierarchies that define life within them, the rich details of the merchant guilds that operate within the hive, the Ashen nomads who scour the wastelands outside, disturbing corpse grinder cults, zealot individuals who lead purge squads down into the hive depths, and of course the far greater exploration of each clan household. And I'm really looking forward to the journey forward as we get into the bizarre details of Primus and those who dwell within. Plus, to just say it again, with Secundus on the horizon, it really is a tantalizing prospect for somebody who really enjoys apocalyptic narrative into the depths of a ruined world. And yes, as I say that, I know people will ask, I am on track to deliver another Apocalypse series video in the near future. But on top of all that, we might also bring in some small content along the line, as I did with my Night Force House Luton, where I similarly lay out for you the background of several of my own Necromunda gangs, why I created them, and how I think they fit into the lore. because I originally created their homebrew lore as part of HIVE looting, but quite honestly, it could easily be used adjacently as the foundation of an outcast gang member within other Necromunda hives, Secundus, or just abandoned areas within the lower hive of Primus. So we'll continue soon enough with more in this series, be that House Escher, where gene sculpting chemical warfare are just as integral to survival as the blade and bullet, gene stealer cults and the perilous allure of forbidden knowledge as their tendrils of corruption weave through the fabric of society, challenging the faith and the resilience of even the staunchest defenders of Necromunda's fragile order. The outcasts whose lives on the fringe of hive cities see individuals often forgotten and overlooked and left to navigate a perilous world that demands cunning, perseverance, and a willingness to do anything to survive. Directly adjacent to this would also be explorations of the Ash Wastes themselves, where nomadic tribes and scavengers endure the toxic storms and hostile terrain, seeking the remnants of past civilizations and the promise of untold riches. There are of course also those who exist not above the law, but who define it, the enforcers of Necromunda's draconian laws, the Adeptus Arbites, and other agencies who strive to maintain order amidst the chaos, wielding absolute authority in their unyielding pursuit of justice. Worth mentioning also the Spirers. All of this, as you can imagine, gets very interesting when you start to see the blurred lines between law and tyranny, order and chaos, against the stark contrast of lawlessness within the Underhive. As always, I hope you've enjoyed the opening portrait of Necromunda, a world where every shadow hides a story, every alleyway echoes with conflict, and every spire displays the best and worst aspects of humanity. Once again, if you want to see more, please do hit the like, as it lets me know to move more content in this direction. And as we conclude, I'll leave you with the thought that in the depths of Necromunda, the struggle for survival and supremacy is both unending and extremely open-ended. Just as with the broader galaxy of 40k, the ongoing story of Necromunda and its inhabitants continues to unfold, one battle at a time. And moreover, what will the new revelations about Hive Secundus and the Malstrain mean for Hive Primus, the Great Houses, Helmore, and Necromunda in the eyes of that wider Imperium?